My mission is to encourage my brothers and wake up the African peoples to unify our continent, Africa.
Muammar Gaddafi lived a life of violence, so it was perhaps inevitable that he would die a violent death. After 2 months on the run, the ousted Libyan dictator was finally hunted down, captured and killed, a bullet to the head. Gaddafi, for decades, surrounded himself with riches at the expense of his own people, ruled with an iron fist, and killed Americans in a reign of terror. He spent his final minutes in tatters, cowering in fear of the vengeance that awaited him.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Hey, Breakdown family. What if everything you thought you knew about Muammar Gaddafi wasn't the full story? To some, he was a tyrant, a ruthless dictator who ruled with an iron fist, crushed dissent, and funded terrorism. But to others, he was a revolutionary, a Pan-African leader who gave his people free healthcare, education, and housing, who invested billions into Africa, funding liberation movements and daring to challenge Western dominance. So which one is true? Today on The Breakdown, we're unpacking the life and legacy of one of the most controversial leaders in modern history, Muammar Gaddafi. From the tent he was born in to the global stage he shook. From free water projects to brutal repression. From championing African unity to being dragged through the streets after a NATO-backed war. This isn't about defending Gaddafi, and it's not about condemning him. It's about digging past the headlines and asking, what really happened in Libya? And what did Africa lose or gain when Gaddafi fell? Was he a dictator who ruled with fear? Or a visionary leader who tried to build a new kind of Africa? We all know how he died, but how many of us really know what he did? This is going to be a good one today. And I want all of you with me in the comments, so don't hold back. I want to hear your thoughts, your take on one of the most controversial African leaders of our time. So stick with me. Now, before we dive in, a big welcome to all our new subscribers and members here at Panagenius TV. I'm so glad you're here. This community we're building, it truly means everything to me because this is exactly how movements start. And every time I read your comments, your ideas, your passion, your drive to make a difference, I'm reminded that change is possible, that our generation isn't asleep. We're wide awake. So if you're watching and haven't joined us yet, consider this your personal invitation. Here at Panagenius TV, we're not just building a channel, we're creating a global home for Black stories that are told with truth, with care, and intention. And if that speaks to you, and I hope it does, hit subscribe, tap that bell, drop a super thanks, or consider joining our membership community where we go beyond the headlines with exclusive content, behind-the-scenes conversations, and a front row seat to the dialogue shaping our future. Because this isn't just content, it's a movement, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. I've actually got an exclusive bonus segment for you there that takes a closer look at the role of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in the fall of Gaddafi, and why Obama calls it the worst mistake of his presidency. Yes, you don't want to miss that. All right, now let's break it down. So before the world knew his name, before the headlines, the oil deals, or the revolutions, Muammar Gaddafi was a boy born in a Bedouin tent in the Libyan desert. No palace, no privilege, just sand, goats, and a struggling colony finding its footing. He was born in 1942, when Libya was still under Italian occupation. His family was poor, illiterate, nomadic, But from an early age, Gaddafi was exposed to two powerful ideas: Arab nationalism and anti-colonialism. As a teenager, he read voraciously about leaders like Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was boldly defying the West and calling for a united Arab world. Gaddafi was obsessed. And like Nasser, he began to believe that foreign powers were the root of Africa and the Arab world suffering, and that only a strong, united revolution could shake them off. So guess what he did? He joined the military, not just to fight, but to learn how to lead. By age 27, he made his move. In 1969, while Libya's king Idris was out of the country for medical treatment, Gaddafi and a group of young army officers launched a bloodless coup. No major battles, no civil war, just a swift takeover that ended 18 years of monarchy and foreign influence. And just like that, Gaddafi went from army captain to head of state. Not president, not king. He called himself the brother leader and declared that Libya would now belong to the people. He immediately abolished the monarchy, shut down foreign military bases, and kicked out oil companies that had been extracting Libya's wealth with little return to the people. Now here's the part that gets interesting. Gaddafi didn't set out to become a dictator, not at first anyway. He genuinely believed he was liberating his country. And he sold himself as a man of the people, not a power-hungry elite. He refused to build a lavish palace, slept in tents on official visits, rejected formal titles, and instead of copying Western-style capitalism or Soviet-style communism, he introduced something completely different, what he called the Third Universal Theory. It was a mix of socialism, Islamic values, and anti-imperialism outlined in his famous Green Book. A new system, he claimed, where the people ruled directly through popular congresses. No parliament, no opposition parties, just the people and their leader. In theory, a grassroots democracy. But in practice, well, we'll get to that. But at this point, Gaddafi was rising. He was young, charismatic, anti-colonial, and unapologetically bold. Across Africa and the Arab world, people were watching. Because here was a man who had taken control of his country's oil, kicked out the West, and was trying to build something completely new. The question was, could he hold on to that vision without becoming the very thing he claimed to fight? So after taking power, Gaddafi didn't waste time. One of his first major moves, nationalizing Libya's oil. At the time, foreign oil companies controlled most of the profits, while ordinary Libyans lived in poverty. Gaddafi changed that. Overnight, billions of dollars started flowing into the state's hands. And unlike many oil-rich nations, he didn't stash all the money offshore or blow it on luxury yachts, at least not in the early years. Instead, he launched a massive campaign to modernize Libya from the ground up. Think about this. In the 1950s and early 60s, Libya was one of the poorest countries in the world. By the 1980s, it had the highest human development index in Africa. Under Gaddafi, healthcare was free, education was free, even for university. Newlyweds got housing grants. Imagine that. Electricity and water were often subsidized or completely free. Basic food items were heavily subsidized by the state. He even promised to give every Libyan family a free home and a car. And for many, he delivered. Then came one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in African history, the Great Man-Made River Project.
Imagine constructing a man-made river across a terrain where water seems almost impossible to find. Libya's Great Man-Made River Project, GMRP, stands as one of the most extraordinary engineering achievements in history, designed to transport water from deep desert aquifers to the country's coastal cities, where the majority of the population resides.
Costing over $25 billion. It was designed to pump fresh water from deep under the desert and carry it to Libya's cities and farms over 1,000 miles away. No foreign debt, no Chinese loans, no World Bank loans, entirely paid for with Libyan money. To this day, it's considered one of the largest irrigation systems ever built, and it provided clean water to millions of people in and around the country. Education rates soared. Literacy shot up from under 30% to, get this, over 80%. Infant mortality dropped. Life expectancy rose. Women gained access to education and could work in government, healthcare, and even the military. Gaddafi also turned his focus outward toward Africa. He poured billions into African countries, building roads, hotels, and telecom networks, supporting the African National Congress during apartheid, funding the establishment of the African Union, and pushing for United States of Africa.
My mission is to encourage my brothers and wake up the African peoples to unify our continent, Africa. Since 1963, the hero of the African unity, Kwame Nkrumah, wanted to unify Africa since that time in one state, one government.
Now, depending on who you ask, this was Gaddafi's golden era, a period of radical transformation where oil wealth was redistributed, and Libya, for a moment, looked like it was on a bold new path. But it wasn't all progress, y'all. As the state expanded, so did Gaddafi's power. There were no elections, no political parties, no checks and balances. He claimed Libya didn't need them because the people ruled themselves through local congresses. But in reality, Gaddafi had the final say on everything. So while life improved materially for many Libyans, politically, it became more repressive. And the longer he stayed in power, the more the line between leader of the people and absolute ruler began to blur. He outlawed political parties, shut down independent media, and created a massive internal surveillance network that tracked what people said, wrote, or whispered. Critics weren't just silenced, they were disappearing too. Dissidents inside Libya were jailed or executed. Those who fled abroad were hunted down, kidnapped, or killed. In 1996, human rights groups reported that over 1,200 prisoners were massacred in a single day at Abu Salim prison, a brutal reminder of what happened to those who defied the regime. Gaddafi's Green Book claimed Libya was a direct democracy, but in reality, it was a system of absolute control, wrapped in revolutionary rhetoric. Then came the global fallout. In 1988, a plane, Pan Am Flight 103, exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270 people. And after years of investigation, Western governments pointed the finger at Libyan agents. Gaddafi denied involvement, but the incident triggered global outrage, and Libya was hit with crippling sanctions. Flights in and out of the country were banned. Oil exports were restricted. The economy contracted. And Libya was cast as a pariah state. But Gaddafi didn't back down, no. Instead, he doubled down on his image as the anti-imperialist champion, funding armed groups around the world, from the IRA in Northern Ireland to rebel groups across Africa to liberation movements in Latin America. To the West, he was a rogue actor, a sponsor of terrorism, a danger. But to some in the global South, he was fighting the same powers that had colonized and exploited their countries for centuries.
Colonel Gaddafi says Libya is prepared for a long war and that the international forces against him will be defeated. He was speaking by telephone on state television. He said the international forces are resorting to terroristic means, but the victory will belong to those who hold the Libyan territory. He added that those who come from behind the seas are too cowardly to come onto our land. We are on our land. We won't give up our children's wealth, our oil to the Americans, Britons, French, and to the Christian countries that formed a coalition against us. We will not leave them to enjoy our oil. They have to know that we will fight on a broad front extending more than 2,000 kilometers. Never ever will you be able to make us surrender. This land will defeat you, inevitably.
He began styling himself not just as Libya's leader, but as the King of Kings of Africa. He wore traditional robes, gathered hundreds of African chiefs, and pledged billions for a unified African currency, army, and passport. Was it ego? Was it vision? Maybe both. But here's the paradox. At home, Libyans were living under an authoritarian regime. Abroad, many African nations were receiving real, tangible support. This is what makes Gaddafi so hard to categorize, right? He was both feared and admired, brutal, but also generous, paranoid, but also visionary. And as the 1990s ended, one thing became clear. Gaddafi had survived revolts, sanctions, and assassination attempts. He wasn't going anywhere. But then came a twist no one saw coming. After decades of defiance, Gaddafi suddenly wanted to make peace with the West. After years of being labeled a global menace, Gaddafi did something no one expected. He pivoted. In the early 2000s, post 9/11, Gaddafi began reaching out to the very countries that had once isolated him. He condemned terrorism, offered intelligence on Al-Qaeda, and in 2003, made a dramatic announcement: Libya would abandon its weapons of mass destruction program. Now pause and think about this. This was the same Gaddafi who had defied the US and Europe for decades. And yet, now he was surrendering his chemical weapons stockpile and inviting international inspectors into the country. Why? Some say it was strategic. He'd seen what happened to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and he didn't want to be next. And others believe he was genuinely trying to reintegrate Libya into the global economy. Well, either way, it worked, at least for a while. Western leaders came flocking. British Prime Minister Tony Blair called it a new relationship. Francis Nicolas Sarkozy signed massive trade deals. Italy's Silvio Berlusconi kissed his hand, literally. Libya reopened to foreign investment. Oil exports boomed. And Gaddafi was suddenly being praised as a model of reformed leadership. But beneath the surface, things weren't so smooth. Despite the international photo ops, many in Libya were growing restless. the country was still a one-man state. Corruption was becoming rampant. Youth unemployment was rising. And the promise of people power through Gaddafi's Green Book had become a hollow slogan. Then came 2011, and the spark that lit the fire. Across North Africa and the Middle East, the Arab Spring, remember, was sweeping through Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, Bahrain. Protests broke out in Benghazi, then Tripoli, then across Libya. The same tools Gaddafi had used for decades, force, fear, and fiery speeches, suddenly weren't enough.
This is one of Gaddafi's last televised speeches. It's February 2011, and the Arab Spring, sparked by anger over decades of corruption, political oppression, and dictatorship, is sweeping through North Africa. The camera's panning across a war-torn building and one of Gaddafi's infamous statues of a fist crushing a US fighter jet to prove he's still in Libya, despite rumours of his escape to Venezuela. Gaddafi's grip on the country is slipping, and now protests against him are erupting across Libya. He's clearly emotional, angry, and quite obviously, delusional. Any act of insurrection, he says, will be punishable by execution. Then he delivers his final threat. We and millions from the Sahara will cleanse Libya inch by inch, house by house, home by home, alleyway by alleyway, person by person, until the country is cleansed of dirt and scum.
Instead of stepping down or negotiating, Gaddafi vowed to cleanse Libya street by street. He branded the protesters as drugged, armed traitors, and the crackdown turned deadly. That's when the international community stepped in. The United Nations authorized a no-fly zone. NATO began airstrikes. And just like that, the West, that had once embraced Gaddafi, now turned against him. In a matter of months, Libya spiraled into full-blown civil war. Rebel forces, backed by NATO bombers, pushed toward Tripoli, and Gaddafi, once untouchable, went on the run. On October 20th, 2011, he was captured by rebels in his hometown of Sirte, dragged through the streets, beaten, then shot to death. His last moments were filmed, mocked, celebrated by some, and mourned by others. His final moments were filmed and broadcast across the world. Grainy, chaotic footage that showed a man once feared by nations, now bloodied and begging for his life.
The rebels dragged Muammar Qaddafi, once the most powerful man in Libya, out of a drainage ditch. And that's when the mayhem started. Gaddafi's last moments were recorded. This is what 42 years of rage looks like.
To some, it was justice. To others, it was a warning. A moment that marked the end of an era and the beginning of something far more uncertain. And his last words, barely audible, but deeply haunting, were, "What did I do to you?" A question whispered through blooded lips. A question that still echoes through Libya, through Africa, and through the pages of modern history. Now here's the part that still sparks debate. Gaddafi had given up his weapons of mass destruction. He had made peace with the West. And yet, he was removed by a Western-led intervention that left Libya in chaos. Was it about human rights? Or about oil, control, and geopolitical strategy? That's a question many are still asking. But here's the thing. It wasn't just his leadership style that made him dangerous. It was also his vision. Because just before he died, Gaddafi was working on something that could have changed the balance of power. And not just in Libya, but across all of Africa.
In 2009, Gaddafi suggested a new currency called the gold dinar, which will be independent of the American dollar. The key objective of this new currency was to divert oil revenues towards state-controlled funds rather than American banks. The gold dinar was also going to replace oil transactions with the American dollars. Countries like Nigeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and Angola were ready to change their currencies and adopt the new one suggested by Muammar Gaddafi. This was an African dream, but at the same time, a nightmare for the Western financial system.
So with Gaddafi gone, what was left behind? What did Libya lose? And what did Africa lose? One of the most ambitious and controversial plans Gaddafi had before his death didn't involve oil, water, or weapons. It involved money, specifically a single African currency backed by gold. Gaddafi believed that true African independence would never be achieved until the continent broke free from Western-controlled financial systems. And he was especially critical of the CFA franc, a colonial-era currency still used by 14 African nations and controlled by the French treasury. So he proposed a radical idea, a new Pan-African currency, often called the gold dinar, backed not by paper, not by the IMF, but by Libya's vast gold reserves. He envisioned a monetary system that would unify African economies, allow countries to trade in a shared sovereign currency, and most importantly, ditch the US dollar and euro in African trade. This wasn't just theory. According to various intelligence reports and diplomatic cables, Gaddafi had already begun talking with African leaders, urging oil-producing and resource-rich countries to sell in gold dinars. According to various intelligence reports and diplomatic cables, Gaddafi had already begun talking with African leaders, urging oil-producing and resource-rich countries to sell in gold dinars rather than dollars or euros. He even offered to store and supply gold to help launch the system. If it worked, it would have created the most independent economic bloc in the global south. It would have strengthened African bargaining power, slashed currency manipulation, and, most importantly, challenged the dominance of the US dollar and euro in Africa. But here's where it gets sensitive. Many observers believe this plan is part of the reason Gaddafi became a target. A leaked 2011 email from Hillary Clinton's private server, published by WikiLeaks, shows advisors discussing Libya's gold reserves and Gaddafi's plan for a pan-African currency. It described the gold dinar plan as a potential threat to the French franc in West Africa, and noted that France was deeply concerned about the implications. Was that the real reason NATO moved so fast? Was Gaddafi's attempt to liberate Africa economically more dangerous to the West than any weapon? Watch the exclusive bonus segment in our membership community where we take a closer look at the role of President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton in the fall of Gaddafi, and why Obama would later call it the worst mistake of his presidency. But here's the heart of the matter. Gaddafi was trying to redefine Africa's relationship with global power. And whether you loved him or hated him, that vision put him on a collision course with the world's most powerful financial interests.
But his death has failed to bring democracy or stability. Instead, Libya has fractured along regional and ideological lines, with militias vying for control of the oil-rich country.
After Gaddafi fell, the world watched, some with relief, others with unease, as Libya descended into chaos. What came next wasn't democracy, It was fragmentation. The country split into rival governments, tribes, warlords, and foreign powers began vying for control. Arms flooded the region. Militias rose. And Libya, once one of Africa's wealthiest nations, became a failed state. Public services collapsed. Oil production plummeted. Hospitals were overrun. And in one of the darkest turns, Libya became a hub for human trafficking and modern-day slavery, with Black African migrants being sold in open-air markets. A decade later, the country still hasn't fully recovered. But Libya wasn't the only one that lost something. Africa did too. For years, Gaddafi had positioned himself as a Pan-African figure. He pushed for a United States of Africa, complete with a single passport, one army, and a central bank. He poured billions into African infrastructure, banks, and development funds. And unlike many Western backers, his money often came without strings attached. He hosted African summits, funded AU operations, and gave smaller nations leverage in negotiations with Europe and China. Was it all about unity? Maybe. Was it also about ego? Maybe. But the influence was real. And when he was gone, that momentum stalled. Today, African nations are more divided than ever. Foreign powers, old and new, are back on the continent, cutting deals, building bases, and carving out influence. And the dream of African unity, well, it still exists. But the man who championed it most loudly is gone. So what was Gaddafi really? A brutal autocrat who silenced opposition and ruled by fear? Yes. A visionary who tried to reshape Libya and empower Africa? Also, yes. He was both. A complicated man. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway. That history isn't always clean. And legacies aren't always easy to judge. What Libya gained under Gaddafi was undeniable. But so is what it lost after he fell. Now, Gaddafi's story may be over, but his ideas, they're not gone. In fact, some say they're being reborn in a new generation of African leaders who are rejecting foreign control and calling for a different kind of sovereignty. One name that stands out today is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 37-year-old soldier who took power in Burkina Faso and is now capturing the imagination of millions across the continent. Is he following in Gaddafi's footsteps or charting a new path entirely? In the next episode of The Breakdown, we're putting them side by side, Muammar Gaddafi and Ibrahim Traoré, what they have in common, where they differ, and what it all means for Africa's future. Make sure you're subscribed because trust me, you won't want to miss it. So my people, I'll leave you with this. Was Gaddafi's fall a liberation or a warning? Who really benefited from Libya's collapse? Was he a tyrant who got what he deserved? Or a flawed leader who was removed not for his crimes, but for daring to challenge a global order? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. That's it for today's show. And if this episode opened your eyes, don't just scroll past. Hit that like button, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to know about what happened in Libya, who needs to know about Gaddafi's story. And let's share it widely. And I also want to invite you to join our membership community where we go deeper beyond the headlines. I've got an exclusive bonus segment for you there that takes a closer look at the role of Barack Obama and Clinton in the fall of Gaddafi and why he calls it the worst mistake of his presidency. Don't want to miss that. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng. Until next time. Take care. Hey, you! Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.